Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
I just want to thank Josh for inviting me to speak about a hot topic. The first time I come out, it could have been, the 5 mysteries of Jesus in the manger, or Padre Pio Stigmata, or something like that, something really interesting. But in fact, he had originally invited me to come out and speak about chastity, which, is kind of its own entity. But then he said, I guess, like a week and a half ago, he said, "Hey, can you change your topic to the HHS thing and contraception?" And I said, "Yes, we can do that." So, throw me into the fire. But I like talking about these things. And I guess a little background about myself is I grew up in Dormont. I went to Keystone Oaks High School. St. Bernard's is my home parish. And I went to the University of Pittsburgh, went to the oratory there, fell away from the faith for a little bit, like a lot of people my age, and but then found my way back to the faith, and thanks be to God for the oratorians. They gave me a great formation there, and then eventually I went to Steubenville, and after studying theology there, I backed my way into high school teaching, went out to Pottsville, Pennsylvania, where I taught for 5 years, and then down to South Carolina for 6 years, and then came back, and then came back here, I guess 4.5 years ago. So I've taught RCIA as well along the way, so I've taught adults, I've taught college, I kind of just a teacher. I enjoy teaching, and I love teaching the faith, and so don't feel bashful about asking questions, putting me on the spot. If I can answer it, I will answer it, and we don't do each other any favors by talking around the issue. We want to talk about it as directly as possible and try to get to the truth of the matter. All right, so hopefully, we have about, 45 minutes here. So as a former high school teacher, that's very good. 45 minutes works very well for me. We'll give you some homework at the end, which is due next week. Now, when he asked me to do this, I thought, well, this is kind of a huge topic. I've talked about contraception many, many times and, taught that. But, this is a whole new wrinkle on this issue. And I do think ultimately, there are a number of different angles you can take to this. Clearly, it is a religious liberty issue, so it's a kind of an American issue. It's an issue of justice, so we can take that angle, and that's a very important one. But I think for Catholics, the point I will try to drive home is that this is a providential moment. Okay, we believe that God's providence guides everything. And just doing all the reading I've done, on Facebook and on all these different articles and things, and my own thoughts on the matter is that the Church has done an extremely poor job of catechizing about contraception and all the things that go with that over the last 40 years. And in some ways, I would look at this as God pushing us out into the arena and say, you need to talk about this, right? Because this is a very serious issue, and you haven't been doing it. All right, and so I found it very interesting, and if you've been watch the news, whether it's CNN or Fox News or whatever you happen to watch, one of the talking points about this is that 98% of Catholics ignore this teaching anyway. All right, now that's irrelevant to the religious liberty issue, okay, but that statistic is fairly accurate. Okay, it is remarkably high. It's remarkably high. Now, that kind of survey is a little bit tricky too, because you could have Catholics who used. I have a good friend whose daughter is getting married next weekend, actually, and he was sterilized at a certain age, had a conversion, came back to the faith, and tried to have the sterilization undone, the vasectomy undone, which was unsuccessful. But if he were asked that question at a mall, have you ever used contraception? He would have to answer yes. But, that was, 20 years ago, and he'd changed his life and had repudiated that, and that's really one of the beautiful things about repentance, is repentance really is a kind of time travel where I go back and I unchoose something. Okay, I did choose it the first time, but now I recognize the sinfulness of it, or maybe I recognized the sinfulness of it at the time, but now I see things differently, so I unchoose that. Right? So somehow in God's providence, he allows us to do that, which is a beautiful thing. But the stats are out there, and, this is something that is, I have talked about, friends of mine have talked about, is just, the sheer number. And it's remarkable, for things like contraception and living together before marriage, these things that most people are doing or have done and perhaps haven't repented of it, and nobody talks about it. Right? So when you go to the church, now, when I say nobody, I say that generically. I've had priest friends that talk about it. Cardinal Donato used to be here. I suspect he might have talked about it. Okay, not a shrinking violet. Some priests will, but like I was just at a parish this past weekend for Mass, and and a very good priest, young priest, a man I respect and admire. And of course, it was, this weekend was dedicated to marriage. And during his homily, he talked about, if you want to get rid of sins like jealousy and anger and things like that, in your marriage. But he didn't mention the one thing that really probably most people are sinning against in their marriage, which is they're living unchastely or have lived unchastely by using contraception. So I just find that, problematic. Now, people might leave the church over that. They might say, I just don't accept that. But again, to talk about things directly, I think it's the most important issue. And all of us, when presenting the church's teachings, we have a solemn obligation to present what the church teaches, come hell or high water, whether people like us for it or not. All right? And, so I think that's the backdrop for this. Now, on the handouts, I don't know how much this is, worth, but again, the angles, I thought, well, what is this, Health and Human Services? So I just went to their website, as everybody does these days. I didn't go to Wikipedia, but it did pop up in my search. But what's that?
Good man.
Yeah, well, I like Wikipedia. Wikipedia is great for this kind of thing. I don't know about in-depth things, but it usually gives you the sketch, very quickly. As long as somebody hasn't been monkeying around with it in the last 24 hours, you're pretty good. But anyway, I went to their website, and this is just what the HHS, says about itself. So, I don't want to belabor that. We don't have to read through that. I did find out that we belong to Region 3. I didn't know that. Whose headquarters are in Philadelphia. So if you want to go talk to somebody in person, although actually going to D.C. probably is faster than Philadelphia, but, there we are. Okay, so, it's a cabinet-level position. Obviously, Kathleen Sebelius is the current secretary of the HHS. I suspect all of us know that she is a Catholic, at least in name. And, she is a driving force behind this, which, it doesn't really boggle the mind. When you read through the scriptures, you see that the role of Israel, you especially see this in the Old Testament, that, the problem with the Israelites is they want to be like the other nations. That's just a guiding theme throughout all the Old Testament. They want to be like the other nations. And so there are all kinds of Israelites that basically will say that they love God and they'll worship God the way they're supposed to, but when it comes down to it, they live the way the other nations do. Right? And that's the way, that's the temptation for Catholics, because the church is the new Israel. And this is one of the reasons, there are all kinds of profound reasons that we read from the Old Testament, but those are lessons to us because we are Israel. When we read how the Israelites failed, we're reading about how we could fail. In fact, I'll just direct you to this. This is a fascinating passage in 1 Corinthians. It's one of those passages, it's not like I've memorized the Bible or anything, but I have a fair knowledge of it. But when I read it, I thought, has that always been in the Bible? Because I have never read that before. That's pretty amazing. This is 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Now, of course, St. Paul is writing to the church at Corinth. So he is writing to Catholics, the young church in Corinth. And this is just remarkable. He says, I want you to know, brethren, that our fathers were all under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea. And all ate the same supernatural food, and all drank the same supernatural drink. For they drank from the supernatural rock which followed them, and the rock was Christ. Okay. So St. Paul is ripping open the veil here of the Old Testament. He's saying the Israelites knew Christ, albeit in a hidden way. Okay. Who led them out of Egypt? It was Christ that led them out of Egypt. Okay? Who fed them in the desert? It was Christ who fed them in the desert. All these things are precursors of the Eucharist and the precious blood. They all drank the same thing. They were all baptized, by marching through the Red Sea. Okay? So this is the church. We're all baptized. Okay? We all drink the same supernatural drink. We all eat the same supernatural food. St. Paul says, nevertheless, this is very sobering for all of us. I take this seriously for myself. Nevertheless, with most of them God was not pleased. So what? Whoa. Nevertheless, with most of them God was not pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Okay. They were overthrown in the wilderness. All right. Now these things are warnings for us, not to desire evil as they did. Do not be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to dance. We must not indulge in immorality, as some of them did, and 23,000 fell in a single day. We must not put the Lord to the test, as some of them did, and were destroyed by serpents, nor grumble, as some of them did, and were destroyed by the destroyer. Now these things happened to them as a warning, but they were written down for our instruction, upon whom the end of the ages has come. Therefore let anyone who thinks that he stands take heed lest he fall. No temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your strength, but with the temptation will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. All right. Now, I would put this in the context of Catholics who use contraception, who embrace abortion in some fashion, even if it's sort of tacitly, and say, well, I would never personally get one, but who am I to impose my faith on somebody else? Okay, this sort of false magnanimity, as if I'm so great-souled that I'm not going to impose my faith. Okay. Well, you're not imposing anybody's faith on anybody. In fact, I was arguing with one of my former students who's seemingly on the wrong side of every issue these days on Facebook. And she said, well, even though I'm a liberal, I'm happy that the government will not impose their morality or have you betray your morality. And I corrected her. I said, there is no such thing in the world as their morality or your morality. There's only morality. That's it. Okay? There's just morality. Right? There are good things and there are bad things. And contraception happens to be one of those bad things. And the church teaches that with authority, even though we shrink from that because it's not, as we say, politically correct. In that sense, we've been overthrown. We want to be like our neighbors. Why can't I use contraception? I go to church and I'm a good person. This thing, these are all things that Catholics say, to sort of justify ourselves. Right? But we don't justify ourselves. God justifies us. That's the whole point of Christ dying on the cross. Okay? And being resurrected from the dead and us being brought into baptism, it is Christ who justifies us. We do not justify ourselves. Christ is the moral law. We are new creatures. And so, this is the morality. The Catholic Church's view of morality is morality. Okay? It's not their morality, our morality, your truth, my truth. It's just is. Okay? Now, obviously, that's highly debatable in our culture today. But as Catholics, that's the stance really that comes down to. We say Jesus Christ is the Son of God. Right? These things are true. Okay? Adultery is wrong. It's always wrong. Okay? That's not my morality. That's not your morality. That's morality. Right? And then most people say, okay, adultery, I'll go with you there. But, contraception, that's a whole other issue. Anyway, let's look at just the First Amendment issue here, and then we'll get into those things. All right. Again, you can read this on your own. I don't want to, when I go to PowerPoint presentations, which you notice I don't have, at least not yet on this, I don't really like PowerPoints. I just use the power to point, and I point at my handout, okay? Because I'm 43 years old, and I didn't grow up with PowerPoint. But anyway, when you go to PowerPoint presentations, and the person reads what they've written up there, and you're like, we're all reading this together. And you can read this. The USCCB discusses, the different points of this. And I don't want to belabor this because it's such a clear infringement of religious liberty. It's just right there in front of everybody. To even argue that it's not. Okay, the people that argue that it's not are the ones that say, well, Catholics don't really believe that anyway. And we say, well, that's irrelevant. Okay. In fact, there's, who says this here? This is just a fundamental point, of the First Amendment, which we have on there. Just the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. This is page 2. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Period. Actually, there's a comma, or a semicolon. Okay, or abridging the freedom of speech or the press, etc. Okay. President Obama, I should say, his administration, the United States government has no competency to define for Catholics what is our teaching. Okay, it's just ludicrous for President Obama to say, well, this is religious and this is not. Okay, so there is a narrow exemption that they put in there in the original mandate, saying that, well, yes, religious institutions which only hire their own and which are, for the proselytizing of the faith, they carve out this very narrow exemption, which is basically like parish rectories. But the thing is, who cares what the United States government says? Catholics define our religion, not the United States government. This is the infringement. Notice it's not people, and it's interesting, even the Supreme Court has gotten this wrong over the last 67 years. And it's interesting to trace this. They've reinterpreted the First Amendment to somehow protect others from religion. Okay. No. Okay. The government just has to stay out and say, we have no competency in this matter. Okay. If you say that's part of your religion, that's part of your religion. Okay. Now, it does bring up very interesting questions, okay, which we won't go into tonight. But, I mean, it does bring up questions of truth about religions and how do you make judgments about religions? Because what if a religion has child sacrifice? You say, well, the government has no competency. So that starts to open up issues of faith and reason and how true religion can't go against reason. Right? So there are some interesting questions that come up there. But all things being equal, the United States government really just has to butt its nose out. And that's ultimately what the bishops have said. I forget if I can find this here quickly. This is second is the place of the church, not of government, to define its religious identity and ministry. Period. Okay. Period. The Catholic Church will say what belongs to it. If we say that, running crisis pregnancy centers and hospitals and things like that, and we will hire some people who are Catholic and some people who won't, and these are the services we'll provide, then that's just our decision. And if the government tries to come in and say, no, you can't do these things, you say, well, it's none of your business. You have no competency. Right? That's the whole point of the First Amendment, is for the government to be limited. Not for religion to be limited, but for the government to be limited. You stay out. Okay? We'll decide what our religion is. We'll, in the freedom, the marketplace of ideas, we'll debate these things, and the government just stay out. Okay? Now, clearly, the Obama administration has overstepped that. I mean, this is a violent action against the Catholic Church and all those religious entities around us who share similar values. Right? So I haven't had time to read all this. I mean, there's so many things coming out, but a Baptist hospital has joined us. EWTN has already issued a law, or what's the word? What's that? Filed a lawsuit. Yeah, they filed a lawsuit. Belmont Abbey College, which was already in a legal battle with the Obama administration, which is trying to make it provide this kind of a mandate for it. Has filed a lawsuit. There's a third lawsuit out there. There are all kinds of conscience issues that come here, which really shows how far down the line we've come. And other people are bringing up other issues now. Like what about private employers? Okay, what if I'm a Catholic? What if I run a business of 30 people? It says here, prohibiting the free exercise thereof. I, as a Catholic, should not be forced to do that. And they'll say, well, you're not a religious entity. I'll say, I am a religious entity. I'm a Christian. I do not want to do that. You have no power to make me do that. So the government is bringing its coercive force against this. This is, it's hard to state. I'm sure you have some sense of this. We have crossed a boundary here of immense proportions, right? Because this is an act of tyranny by the United States government against religious institutions, right? And really what it comes down to is there's a battle here. There are two competing worldviews, right? I think I have it laid out there, but okay, there are two battles about what human nature is about. Okay, in fact, this is one of the arguments I have sometimes just to sort of purify the word. People will say, "Oh, that's just politics. Oh, that's just politics. That's just politics." I'll say, "Yeah, well, politics is a profound, profound thing. I mean, what is politics about?" Okay, it comes from the Greek word polis. It's how do you order the city? Okay. How do you order the city? So politics is always a question of what is good and what is evil. Now, sometimes it's just politics about tax rates and things like that, but even those things are questions about what is the good. Right? And those are profound, profound questions. And people say, "Oh, you're just arguing politics. It's just politics." What do you mean? It's just politics. Okay, these are the most profound things that human beings have to answer. Okay, this is why it's a battleground. Politics is a battleground. Sometimes, it can be minor things where, you say, well, okay, compromise on this thing or that thing, whether we build a highway there, whether we build a highway there, those are minor questions about the good. But here, we're talking about major questions of the good, and there are two competing, worldviews here. And there are really two competing worldviews about what a human being is. So if you turn to... we have some other notes there, but we only have so much time. So, what is the deeper issue? The two competing worldviews. And we'll just borrow the term here. There is a culture of death and a culture of life. You can go all the way back to the 4th century and read St. Augustine's book, The City of God, which, is like 6,000 pages long. 1,000 pages, something like 1,000 pages long. I've only read little bits and pieces. But St. Augustine took this whole theme up and played out. He said, the city of man and the city of God are at war with each other. Right? Now, of course, they're mixed together, too. because Christians live amongst the unregenerate. Okay? And of course, the point is to bring more and more people into the church. That's what the church exists for. The church is the universal sacrament of salvation. The point of the church is to make more and more Catholics. Okay? The point of the church is to reproduce. Okay? That's what it's about. And so it's interesting about contraception, right? And this is a point I want to make. If Catholics close themselves off to natural conception, they also close themselves off to supernatural conception. Because the thing is, contraception, all things being equal, freely chosen, is all the things that go into making a mortal sin is the stuff of mortal sin. Right? And so it shuts down the divine life in me, which I received at baptism, which was intensified at confirmation, which is renewed every time I receive Holy Communion if I'm in a state of grace, and is strengthened in me. Right? But if I shut that down, okay, I reduce myself back to the natural level from which I came. And the Bible talks about this as the old Adam. Okay, the new Adam. The old Adam. I'm an old creature. This is concupiscence. This is the war within me. This is St. Paul talking about, I do not do the good that I wish I would. I have a number of, passages we can look here. But these are the things that come out at Mass. Okay, and this is where I wish priests would be more, they would name these things. Okay, because, I don't know if you're like me at Mass. I teach theology and I like these things, but when I'm at Mass, I'm kind of whoosh. Okay? I have to really concentrate. Wait, what was that second reading from St. Paul in Galatians? What is that about? Okay, because it has some application to my life. Okay, or better yet, what was that Old Testament reading about? I don't know, Numbers. Okay, so King David counted up his armies before they went into Israel, and God was not pleased. And you're like, well, why? What's up with that? Okay, I don't know. So well, because David, it was a lack of faith. When you start counting up your armies. Okay. To find out how many people you have, it's because you're calculating. Right? You don't have faith in God anymore. You're saying, I think we're on our own here, and so how many do we, 600,000? Yeah, maybe that's good enough. We might be able to take out the Assyrians. I wish I had 50,000 more. But no, the thing is, I entrust myself to God. Right? And David should have known that from when he was a teenager, because he goes out and defeats Goliath with a rock, in his slingshot. Right? Well, it's through he has some ability, but grace works on nature. And God allows his nature to be fruitful there by killing Goliath, an enemy of the church, okay, the enemy of Israel. And he goes out. So anyway, two competing worldviews, the culture of death, sterilization, abortion, contraception, in vitro fertilization. Okay. Now I noticed when I was teaching RCA, which I taught from, I think, like 2002, with 1 year off there, 2007, and I recognized after a couple years, because I would always hit contraception hard, and say, look, if you're Catholic, you cannot use contraception. If you do, this is what it means. But then I also recognize, I got to flip that around. We got to talk about in vitro fertilization. In some ways, in vitro fertilization is harder to argue against because it's a baby. You're like, well, why is the church against babies? Okay. This is one of those interesting things where if you start to look very closely, you say, well, maybe the church really knows what it's talking about. Because people argue, say, oh, you just want us to have 10, 11, 12 babies, and you don't have any care about any of this stuff. Oh, but wait, the church is against in vitro fertilization. And if the church were only about having babies, the church would not be against in vitro fertilization. Okay. So why is the church against in vitro fertilization? Oh, because the church recognizes that the marital act is procreative and unitive. So in vitro fertilization is an attack against the unitive good of the sexual act. And here the church is saying, no, 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 no. A child must result from a sexual act. Okay? And then somebody, well, the church is obsessed with sex. No, the church understands what the nature of sex is. It is procreative and unitive. So contraception, sterilization, these things, abortion as an after effect of this, of getting rid of the child. So it says, no, that is an attack against the procreative element. Okay? But there are also attacks against the unitive element. Okay? The bringing about of a child should not be a scientific experiment. Okay? There are all kinds of reasons to be against in vitro fertilization. Starting with the masturbation that begins the process, the fertilization of multiple eggs, so that even if one or two children come to fruition, there are now embryos that are in a state of suspended animation that have just been put off to the side. And then the greedy modern world comes along and said, oh, those are extra children. Maybe we could experiment on them to help prolong our lives. It's really a form of high-tech cannibalism. We'll make children, and then we'll have some of them, but the other ones we could experiment on. And they're so small, people won't really see it, because it's such a little thing. Right? But the church says, no, it's a real thing. It's a child. It's a child in its first days of existence. The same way you and I came about, okay, is the same way there. So the church is the one that has the profound wisdom, and the world rails against the church. Which really just happened all the way back in Genesis. Because in Genesis, it's really Satan speaking through the world. Okay. So we go all the way back to Genesis, but you see the whole pattern of sin here. Now the serpent was more subtle than any other wild creature that the Lord God had made. He said to the woman, "Did God say you should not eat of any tree of the garden?" Just substitute something else in there. Did God say, or better yet, did the church say that you shouldn't use contraception? Okay. Did the church say that you shouldn't use in vitro fertilization? Now, Eve is well catechized. All right, she actually knows the answer to this, and not only does she know the answer, she knows it better than Adam does. Okay, because she embellishes it. I mean, in a good way. She just adds on to it. We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. Okay, we may do all these good things. Okay, but God said, "You shall not eat of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, neither shall you touch it." Okay, don't even get close to it. All right, lest you die. But the serpent said to the woman, "You will not die." Okay. So the serpent, the liar, accuses God of lying. The world accuses the church of lying. Okay. The church is lying to you. Okay. And we use this in all different kinds of ways. The church is outmoded. I mean, I think some Catholics think of our rule against contraception the way, Amish don't use electricity. So isn't that cute? Oh, the Amish don't, we just pat them on the head. We like to go visit and we, shop with them. And you say, well, but I'm using electricity. I mean, it's nice that some people don't use electricity. I'm sure there's a great lesson there for us. And some people don't use contraception. I'm sure that is well and good. But I'm using it. Okay. And we just see this as some arbitrary thing, just draw a line in the sand. And, that was 1878, so we didn't use electricity back then. And now, see, the problem is the church has backed itself into a corner, and it can't look bad by saying that it was wrong, so it just keeps saying it again and again. No, contraception is wrong, even though we all know it's fine. Okay. I mean, this is how the world does this. I mean, Barbara Boxer, and C.S. Lewis has a great term for this. He calls it chronological snobbery. So Barbara Boxer, as her moral argument, says, it's 2012. People, it's 2012. Yeah, I know. It's going to be 2013 next year. Okay, I didn't realize morality changed when we came into the 21st century. Okay, which is really a riff on the kind of growth and progress that God calls us to. God calls us to maturity. This is St. Paul's to us in Ephesians, which is one of my favorite little lines here. In Ephesians, which happens to have Ephesians 5:21-32, which is about marriage, but Ephesians chapter 3, verse, where are we here? 13, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood. Okay. Christianity is all about growth, okay? Because in baptism, we're born again. Well, the first time I was born, on the natural level, I had to grow up. And the same thing with baptism. Okay, I'm born again, but then I have to grow up. Okay, I have to grow up to be what? I have to grow up to be Christ-like. Right? And that is a long process, okay, which involves my complete transformation as a human person. It's all there in seed form through baptism, intensified in confirmation. You are fed on the flesh of Christ himself. All right, but then the battle is engaged. I have to grow up. And we know there are all kinds of ways of falling, to be overthrown in the wilderness, or again here St. Paul, to mature manhood to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind of doctrine by the cunning of men, by their craftiness and deceitful wiles. Don't be misled by the world. The world's going to tell you all kinds of things. Okay? It's the church that will lead you to maturity. Not the world, not the New York Times, not the Washington Post, none of those things. Okay? Those are not the voices of the shepherd. Okay? Now, occasionally there might be little bits and pieces. I'm not saying that everything ever appeared in the New York Times is wrong or everything in the Washington Post. But for the deepest and most profound things, it is Holy Mother Church that will lead you to these things. Right? If you want to grow up to be what you are meant to be, Christian, know your dignity. You are meant to be another Christ, okay? Which means complete and utter transformation of my entire person, including my sexual being. Okay? Single, married, celibate, all those things. All of those are calls to maturity. So rather speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body, joined and knit together by every joint with which it is supplied, which each part is working properly, makes bodily growth and upbuilds itself in love. Right? Now we would argue the culture of death does damage and destroys the life that has been brought about. That's what the culture of death is about. Okay? In a certain sense, if you see the world sacramentally, you see in contraception, conception is like an anti-sacrament. Okay? Marital love, taught by the church for 2,000 years. Okay, with deviations by the local nun and, popular culture and the mother who wouldn't explain the birds and bees, all those things. But the church has taught for 2,000 years that the marital embrace, sexual union between married people is a holy and good act. Okay? It is a means of grace. It is a mode of sanctification. Right? It's not something bad. It's not something tawdry. It's something holy. Okay? It's something good. It's something noble. Right? It's something that Christians are to engage in. Right? Without, guilt. Nobody should, Father, forgive me, I had sex with my wife. What? Okay. That's a good thing. Okay? It's not a bad thing. It's not a sin. Okay? So contraception. This is what contraception is all about. So what it does is it wants to manipulate the sexual act, to make it look like it's the same thing when really it has now become something different. Right? Now this is, Blessed John Paul II put this into modern language very beautifully, right, in his Theology of the Body, because he says that if you look at the human body, it is a sacrament, and a sacrament is a visible sign of an invisible reality. So your body is a visible sign of an invisible reality. Right? And as composite creatures, we really are the marriage point between matter and spirit. Right? Angels are pure spirits, created. But human beings are composite creatures. We are matter and spirit. Right? And so the visible sign of an invisible reality, which is the person. And so John Paul II says, you are your body. I remember hearing an interview once with Cindy Crawford, and it was very odd the way she talked about her body, because she distanced herself from her body, because she had become a commodity. And so she thought about her body as distinct and separate from herself. And this is one of the things that Catholics, it's probably a temptation throughout the history of the world in some ways. Dualism is the most ancient of heresies, which has different forms, but it's basically this idea that the spirit is good and the material world is evil. Right? And this plays itself out in two different ways, at least in the sexual sphere. It could be the fear of sex, or it can be sort of promiscuity, because the person says, I'm not my body. I'm a spirit, trapped in my body. Even Plato made this mistake. I'm a spirit trapped in my body, and so what I do with my body is somewhat irrelevant with who I am. And as Catholics say, no. God became man. God took on a human nature. We already know through the book of Genesis that God created everything good. The material world is good and is a means of grace. And then the crowning achievement of that is God, the second person of the Trinity, comes back into his creation and takes it on. Says, I will participate in my creation. I've been participating for all these years, but now I will actually become one of you. Right? The central core mystery of Christianity is the incarnation. Right? In our new translation, incarnate, enfleshed. So the culture of death, sterilization, abortion, contraception, in vitro fertilization. This is just how I came up with this, but just maybe a colloquial way of saying that we are on our own and we got to make it work, by hook or by crook, no matter what. That's sort of the culture of death. We got to have sex, but you know what? This whole baby thing is a problem. And that's really the culture of death says the baby is a problem. The culture of death says the woman's body is a problem. It really holds up in some ways a distorted view of mankind, and it's very strange because feminists do this probably more than anybody. Feminists hate their bodies. And they say, I need to be like that man that can sleep with whomever he wants. You say, what kind of standard is that? The man is not the standard. And yet, these kind of feminists, there is a good kind of feminism out there too, but to reject your body, the woman's body is a tabernacle. made for other human life to inhabit. Okay? It's a remarkable, beautiful, singular grace for women to experience the world that way. Whether they have children or not, they are that. Okay? And every woman who doesn't have a child, okay, experiences that in some profound way. She is meant to be a mother as well. Her body, even if it doesn't function properly or she doesn't get married or all those kinds of things, which there's a sadness and a cross there, still participates in the profound experience of being a woman. Okay? And that way it's not diminished at all. Her body is a tabernacle. Right? And this is why men, properly ordered, we put women on a pedestal, or we should. Okay? Because that's where tabernacles go. You look in the church, they're on a pedestal. And so the man looks at the woman and says, you're this living tabernacle. You're a place where life comes from. Okay? Now, of course, it takes two to tango, as we say, and man has his part in that. But it's the woman's body that in some way embodies the mystery in a more profound way because she carries the child for 9 months. Right? This is where we get our profound respect and admiration and veneration of the Blessed Mother. She carries the Christ child in her womb. And that's a grace that kind of redounds upon every woman. What's the poetic phrase? The singular boast of humanity is a woman. It's the Blessed Mother. Right? Now, the culture of life takes very seriously the first commandment in the entire Bible. A little Freudian slip there. In the entire baby. What is the first commandment in the entire Bible? Actually, you can say a couple things and be right on this, but
Love your Lord. Love God.
that is incorrect. That is the first of the 10 commandments. So yes, that is true. Okay. But the first commandment, at least to human beings in the entire Bible, is to have sex. And I kid you not. In Genesis chapter 1, okay, then God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him male and female. It's really together that we image God. Right? Because God is Trinitarian. He's relational. It's not man singular or woman singular that images God, although there is the element of reason and will. But it's really the human race, okay, male and female, that images God. Right? And that's a profound reality. Of course, this is the backdrop of the culture of death, which wants to androgynize all society. Okay? Instead of the French, vive la différence, celebrate our differences between men and women, the culture of death says, no, we're all equally the same. Man and woman, the plumbing's a little different, but we're just the same. No psychological differences, no emotional differences, none of that. Okay. And we say, well, have you ever read any sociology or psychology? I mean, this is the odd schizophrenia of the modern world. I mean, you read all these things about how different men and women are, but then somebody comes, oh, no, we're all the same. Okay. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it. Okay. God wants us to have children. Right? God wants us to have children. So openness to life. Okay. Acceptance of defects. Okay. One of the quiet Holocaust that's going on now is the elimination of Down syndrome children. I was just talking to a woman who just had her 9th or her 10th child, and her child is a Down syndrome child. And she was talking to a friend who works in, I forget, it was like a special care unit. And in that special care unit, it's like 3 different school districts or something, there is 1 Down syndrome child. Where are all the Down syndrome children? They're being aborted. Okay. And this is one of the things that we have to call people on and say, abortion is not about poverty. Okay. There are all kinds of middle-class people and wealthy people that go into abortion clinics to get rid of their Down syndrome child. Or the other one that's happening now more and more often, even in the West, is sex selection. And they're starting to notice that, in China, it's way off. Okay. But even in the West now, the male-female ratio is starting to go a little haywire. It's because people who contracept, I think this is probably how it plays out, get married later. Okay. They want to have a child, not many children. They want to have 1 child or maybe 2 children. One of both kinds. That'd be it. Then we're done. All right. But if they only have 1 child, they want a boy. And so if the woman gets pregnant with a girl, they terminate that pregnancy. They kill their own child. And then they try again. Right? So it's sex selection. Now people are starting to wring their hands about this. We say, look, this is all part and parcel of what happens when you admit of abortion at all. Okay? People, can you abuse abortion? I mean, that's what they're abusing abortion. Okay? Abortion is only meant for 14-year-olds who have a pregnancy, not when you're 25, and who are you to draw that line? Okay? That's not a line that's drawn, because behind this is, we know the name of the demon. Okay, the demon is Moloch. Okay, in the Old Testament, the demon Moloch, which the Israelites succumb to, and this is why God is so severe when the Israelites go into idolatry, because it's not just idolatry. It always involves some kind of sexual perversion, and ultimately, with the demon Moloch, he demanded child sacrifice. Okay, the demon Moloch is behind the abortion industry. Okay, now, I know I'd be laughed at in many places for saying that, but it's true. It's demonic. Okay, it is a demonic industry. And this is why the culture of death is holding hands with the devil. And that's why they argue for this stuff. They don't want to compromise on it. They have sold their souls. Okay? This is who I am, and this is what I'm about. This is the world that I envision. And of course, it always comes as some kind of good thing. Of course, we need to rename it. It's women's health. Are you against women's health? How could you be against women? Are you against women's health? What kind of cretin are you? Okay, I don't know. I mean, women can have I don't care if they take their appendix out. That's good. I mean, I don't want them to die. No, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about abortion. Oh, well, that's different. Okay. Anyway, the culture of life, open to life, acceptance of defects, trust in God's providence. Okay. Again, this is about the transformation. This is part of the marriage vocation. Now, again, the church is completely reasonable about this. The church doesn't say that everybody has to have 10 children. But it says, look, if there's a serious reason for not having a child, and there are serious reasons, it could be emotional, it might be financial, especially in the postmodern world, where it seems like our money is being taken from us in every direction. Okay, to be open to life, it might mean that after 3 children, or at least for some time period, say, I can't. It's just not. It's not. To have a child now would be problematic in some serious way, and the church says, okay. There is a morally licit way of avoiding births. And of course, we all know it's natural family planning. Okay. Not the rhythm method. Okay. This is amazing. Okay, this is 2012, and the church hasn't been preaching the rhythm method, as far as I can tell, since the 1970s. And yet you still see this in articles. Like, what? Are you a reporter? I mean, are you paid to do your job? Because you don't know anything. This is kind of embarrassing just from a professional standpoint. Now, I read a good article about this too. We often talk about natural family planning being highly effective. Now, I'm not married, so I haven't practiced natural family planning, so I can't speak about it from sort of the inside view. But I have many friends who have lots of children, and they've practiced natural family planning. And people say, see, it doesn't work. But actually, I do have some friends who space their children about 2 years apart. So natural family planning, at least if you're disciplined, works at a high rate. But there was one author I was reading, he says, look, okay, even if it did not work, or did not work at the highest rate, the point is to live your life according to God. Okay? And the thing is, we don't want to buy into the culture of death, which says the child is a problem. Okay? Now, the child could be, could be a problem in a small p sense of the word. Okay, I don't want to downplay that. But trusting in God's providence. Okay, this is what Jesus exhorts us to in Matthew 7. That the lilies of the field, all these things. Trust God. Okay? We don't want to be like King David, who's calculating his armies to figure out how much I can do. And this is the thing that's bred into us. I get it too. I'm 43 years old, and I'm watching some commercial, and there's somebody saying, you have to have $1,283,000 to retire and live the life that you want to live. You're like, oh my gosh. Okay, so, I'm not saying there isn't a place for some of that, but it breeds into us a kind of calculation. We don't know what the future holds. I might be dead tomorrow. Okay? And to calculate is really anti-Catholic in a certain sense, because I have to trust God's providence. Now, it doesn't mean to shut down my brain. We certainly uphold the virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. I think, I have one set of friends who have a lot of children, and I love all their children, and I would never say any of them are a mistake, but they're in they have some serious financial issues, and I wonder, all things being equal, perhaps it would have been more prudent in some way to not. But then even there, I said, well, who am I? Okay, I don't know what the future holds for them. And that also shows us that the church is a community. And people who are generous with their fertility benefit the entire society. Those are your future sons-in-laws, daughters-in-laws, workers, tax base, all those things, okay? Those people are sacrificing something. You who are parents are sacrificing something by having children. It is for the common good. We're going to run out of time here. I don't want to go over, but, and this is another thing I'll just throw in here. The culture of death likes to talk about overpopulation, okay? Now, for a Catholic, that term should be repugnant. Because the question is, well, who are these extra people? Clearly, it's not you that we're talking about, because you are an important person. You're here to tell us about overpopulation, okay? Thank God you were born. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that there is an issue with the way we live, okay? And I'm perfectly willing, and here's my little pithy way of saying it, or I hope it's pithy, but we may have too many cars, but we don't have too many people, right? We probably need to change the way we live. Okay, I'm not a global warming person. I happen to think that it's not true. But then I say, so what? There are stronger arguments than the possibility of global warming about how we live our lives. Okay, one of my favorite areas is urban renewal. The new urbanism. Why are we so dependent upon automobiles? Okay, why don't we walk more places and bike more places? I mean, those are big questions that Catholics really, maybe one of the children who was aborted would have been a brilliant, urban planner that would have helped, refashion our cities and say, here's how you build cities, okay? So we can actually have more people fit in them, and it's actually greener, if you want to use that term, and this is how we're going to do it. Okay? Mother Teresa speculated that the person who, would have cured cancer has been aborted a long time ago. Okay? We don't know those things, and this is, again, where we trust in God's providence. Some of the people who were aborted would have been child molesters. Some of them would have been drug addicts. Some of them would have been great violinists. The point is, humans have a dignity, and it's not whether they would have been a drug addict, okay, or a child molester, or a great violinist, or a priest, or whatever. The point is, we must always do the right thing and entrust ourselves to God's providence. So I don't know if we'll end up. I got to let you go here. So this is what we get tonight. I don't know if I've answered your question. I mean, I haven't answered any questions. I'm sorry. This is the issue, okay? I think this is a providential time. Maybe we can come back or invite somebody else back, talk about contraception specifically. And I don't know if that's a problem. I'm hoping I'm preaching to the choir. But as Catholics, if we've used contraception and we haven't repented of it, we need to repent of it, okay? We need to start becoming, and I say this in one sense, PhDs of marriage and family life. I'll close maybe with this little story. I was talking to my financial planner, who I'm hoping can turn $2.53 into $1,248,000. And he was asking me about Catholic education. He's a nice guy. I knew he wasn't practicing the faith, so I dropped a couple bombs in the conversation. And he was asking about Catholic schools because his wife wants to send the kids to Catholic schools, but he's not real interested in that. Even though he owns 2 homes, he's worried about the cost, and he's been paying his money into the school district for 17 years, and now he's finally going to get some money, value out of that, whatever. I said, well, the most important thing is that you are raising the kids in the faith, okay? And it turned out later in the conversation he doesn't go to Mass at all. Okay, so there you go. Because that is the most important thing, is the family living the faith, okay? In every way. Are the parents not contracepting? Or are you praying the rosary together? Are you going to Mass? Are you helping your neighbor? All the kinds of things that going into being, a pretty robust Catholic. But anyway, I asked him at one point, I said, you seem to know your stuff about financials. And his eyes lit up. He said, yeah, I do. I said, I bet you read about this every day, don't you? He said, yeah, I do. I said, well, you need to know your faith that way. Okay? And I would say for married couples, from the very beginning, obviously, I'm not, a married man, at least not yet. And I say, but married couples in some ways need to be the experts on marriage. Not just their own marriages, but marriage. Okay? Because you are the ones that go to Thanksgiving dinner and go to Christmas dinner and talk to your sisters and brothers and cousins who are contracepting and doing things that are harming themselves and, in the big scheme of things, are endangering their eternal salvation. All right, to put, the most blunt point upon it. These are things that endanger your eternal salvation. And to live and not repent of those things is a terrible thing. Right? You are hurting the common good, you're hurting society, you're hurting yourself, and you do not want this on your resume when you die, because you have to answer to God. And God will say, well, the church taught against it. Well, I know on my conscience I was, because I read something in the New York Times. And I said, that's not good enough. So we have to be the prophets that say, look, contraception's wrong, and here, we've lived our lives. Joe and I, we've done this. Jill and I, we've done this for 10 years. And yes, we've had these bumps along the way, but, God has provided, and He will help you. Okay, and we would love for you to have a third or fourth or fifth child. It always saddened me when I heard people who otherwise were pretty good parents, because I was a teacher, I want to teach your children. I like your children. Okay, and it always saddened me when they say, well, we're done. Okay, and if I knew them well, I said, well, I'd love for there to be another Lewis in the world, another Smith, or whatever your last name is. Okay, why? Okay, that child is an image, is a sacramental image of your love. Okay, so you have 2 kids, and you say, well, we're done. Okay. It's like a priest. Oh, I've been at the parish for 3 years. I'm going to stop saying Mass. It's like, what? Why? It's your vocation. Well, I know. I've said Mass for 3 years. That's fine. It's good. Pretty much good. All right, so I'm sorry we didn't have time for questions and answers, and I love questions and answers because it helps guide the conversation, but I apologize for that. But we only had 45 minutes, so okay. Anyway, thank you for your attentiveness. I'll stick around. I'll come over and